The morning sun cast a soft glow over the busy city streets. People rushed past each other, caught up in their own worlds, oblivious to the small struggles happening at their feet. On the corner of 7th Avenue, a homeless man shuffled forward, clutching a tattered cup in his trembling hands. His clothes hung loosely, worn and dirty, and the weight of the world seemed to sit heavily on his shoulders. He scanned the crowd with hopeful eyes, searching for a kind face, Simone, who might spare even the smallest help. After what felt like an eternity, his gaze landed on Steven Seagal, who was walking calmly down the street, seemingly immune to the chaos around him. There was no flashy suit, no expensive watch, just quiet confidence and an aura of calm that seemed to part the crowd naturally. The man hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the small space between them. "Just $1?" he asked. People walking by paused for a fraction of a second. Some sneered. Others shook their heads, muttering under their breath. "Why bother?" one woman whispered. "It's just $1." Seagal didn't flinch. He stopped, turned, and looked at the man. His eyes were steady, measuring, not judging. He took in the man's tattered clothing, the weariness in his posture, the desperation in his gaze. And instead of dismissing him, he smiled. It was a small, calm smile, but it carried a weight that silenced the whispers of the crowd. "You don't need just $1, do you?" Seagal said quietly, his voice gentle but firm. The man's eyes widened slightly, unsure how to respond. No one had spoken to him like that before. Not with understanding, not with respect. Around them, the city moved on, oblivious to the small drama unfolding on the corner. But for those who paused and looked, something strange began to happen. Time seemed to slow. The shuffling feet, the honking cars, even the harsh wind, they all faded into the background. And in that moment, the homeless man realized this encounter was different. Something was about to happen, something no one had expected, something that would shock everyone nearby. Because Steven Seagal didn't just see a man asking for money. He saw a person, and in that recognition, the stage was set for an act of kindness that no one would forget. It was a crisp Monday morning, the kind where the sunlight hits just right, illuminating the city with a neutral, soft glow. The streets were alive with movement. Delivery trucks rumbling past, cyclists weaving between cars, office workers clutching coffee cups as they hurried along the sidewalks. The usual urban chaos had settled into its familiar rhythm, but amidst the noise, a small scene began to unfold on the corner of 7th Avenue. A scene that would quietly arrest the attention of anyone who happened to look. The homeless man shuffled forward again, his movements slow and deliberate, as if every step required careful calculation. His hands, rough and weathered from years of struggle, clutched a tattered paper cup, the edges frayed and stained. He had no shoes that fit, only worn sneakers with holes revealing his tired feet. His jacket, once probably decent, now hung loosely, faded from countless washes and hardened by the elements. His face was a roadmap of hardship, lines etched deep into his skin, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights, lips cracked from the cold. As he approached, the crowd seemed to react in subtle ways. People glanced sideways, some shifting uneasily, others tightening their grips on briefcases or coffee cups, as though even the smallest gesture of acknowledgement might somehow be contagious. A woman in a bright red coat shook her head, muttering, "It's just $1. Why bother?" A man in a black leather jacket scoffed quietly, "It won't change anything." Even the city itself seemed to move faster around them, impatient, unaware that a moment of significance was about to unfold. And then Steven Seagal appeared, not with a sense of urgency, not with a swagger designed to draw attention, but with calm confidence that demanded notice without asking for it. His clothes were simple but neat, a fitted dark jacket over a plain shirt, jeans that fit comfortably but not ostentatiously, no flashy watch, no sunglasses to shield him from the world, just presence. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, each one landing softly but with a certain authority. The homeless man froze slightly at the sight. Something about Seagal's demeanor, the quiet assurance in his posture, made the world feel heavier and lighter all at once. He took another tentative step forward. "Just $1." His voice wavered, But the words carried across the space between them, soft yet poignant. Seagal stopped and looked at him, crouching slightly to meet the man's eyes. His expression was calm, steady, and unjudging. He scanned the man's tattered clothes, the worn shoes, the exhaustion etched into his face. But he saw more than that. He saw the story of hardship, the quiet resilience, the human being standing there despite everything stacked against him. Around them, the world seemed to pause. A street musician strummed his guitar a little more slowly, as if sensing a shift in the atmosphere. A delivery truck slowed at the corner, waiting for a pedestrian to cross. Unaware that the most important pedestrian wasn't crossing at all, he was standing still, eyes locked on a man who could have ignored him in an instant. Seagal's gaze never faltered. "Tell me your story," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight of empathy that drew the man in. The homeless man blinked, surprised. No one had asked him that in years, not with genuine curiosity, not with respect. People usually looked through him, past him as if he were invisible. Yet here was someone who wanted to hear, really hear, the struggles behind the ragged exterior. The man's lips trembled. He swallowed, and finally, in a voice barely audible over the city's hum, he began. I lost my job, and then my apartment. My family. They couldn't stay with me anymore. I've been trying to get by, just hoping for a little help." Seagal nodded slowly, absorbing every word. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity. He just listened, and in that listening, a curious transformation began. The people who had been watching, some skeptical, some judgmental, began to lean in slightly. The whispers faded. Even the impatient pedestrian stepping past slowed to a stop, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Seagal reached into his jacket pocket. But he didn't pull out $1. Instead, he paused, looking around at the street, the people, the small crowd that had begun to gather, drawn by curiosity more than compassion. His eyes returned to the man. "You need more than $1 to get back on your feet, don't you?" The man's eyes widened. Confusion, disbelief, and cautious hope flickered across his face. I don't know what to say," he stammered. Seagal smiled gently. "You don't need to say anything yet. Just tell me everything. Every struggle, every challenge. Let me understand." And so the man began to speak, his words spilling out hesitantly at first, then with more confidence as he realized someone was truly listening. The city moved around them. People came and went, but for a small circle, time slowed. This wasn't about judgment or charity or performance. It was about recognition, human dignity, and the power of quiet empathy. As the man's story unfolded, the onlookers couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Some felt shame for their earlier judgments. Others felt a stirring of hope, as if witnessing an act of understanding could somehow remind them of their own humanity. And Steven Seagal stood there, calm, attentive, completely unshaken by the expectations of the crowd. He wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't seeking praise. He was simply doing what felt right. The stage was set. The tension hung in the air. Everyone waiting, knowingly or unknowingly, for the moment when quiet compassion would become action, and when the world around them would witness something no one expected. The homeless man took a shaky breath and began recounting the details of his life. The story that had been buried under layers of shame, struggle, and neglect. He spoke of lost jobs, eviction notices, and nights spent sleeping under bridges where the cold seeped into his bones and the darkness into his soul. He talked about family members who had tried to help but eventually gave up, leaving him to navigate the harsh streets alone. Each word was heavy with hardship. Each pause a silent acknowledgement of pain endured. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, yet those closest to the scene slowed their steps. Some people lingered, watching with curiosity or discomfort, unsure how to react. Whispers floated through the small crowd. "Is he really listening?" a woman asked. "It's just a story," muttered a man in a gray coat. "Why get involved?" Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't glance at the passing cars or the impatient pedestrians. He remained still, his eyes locked on the man, absorbing every word, every nuance, every tremor in his voice. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding and quiet authority. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed. bending around the two of them like a protective bubble, shielding them from the indifference of the city. Then came the judgment from the crowd. A man in a business suit, briefcase in hand, stepped forward and scoffed loudly. "Why are you wasting your time on him? He's just asking for money. Doesn't he know how the world works?" Another voice joined in, sharper this time. "People like him, lazy, helpless. They'll take anything you give them and never change." The homeless man flinched, but he didn't back away. Seagal's hand rested lightly on the man's shoulder, grounding him, giving him courage. "Don't listen to them," Seagal said, calm but firm. "They don't see the person in front of them. They only see labels." The crowd's whispers escalated into murmurs of judgment. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and a few glared openly. But even as the negativity swirled around them, the homeless man felt something shift inside. Seagal's presence was steady, unwavering, a silent shield against the cruelty of judgment. Seagal reached into his jacket pocket once more, this time pulling out a small notebook. The crowd leaned in, slightly curiosity overcoming cynicism. The homeless man tilted his head, puzzled. What was he doing? Was he finally giving money? Was this just a small token, like a dollar Seagal began writing numbers carefully, deliberately, as though crafting a plan, a solution beyond what anyone could imagine. He didn't speak, didn't announce his intentions. He simply wrote. The suspense in the air thickened. People around them stopped whispering. Their attention was caught. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. A young woman standing a few feet away whispered to her friend, "Is he writing a check for him?" Her friend's jaw dropped. "No way. It's probably just a joke." But Seagal's calm demeanor left no room for doubt. The man's curiosity grew with each passing second. His voice caught somewhere between fear and hope. I don't understand," he murmured. Seagal looked up, eyes meeting his. "You need more than $1, he said simply, his tone quiet but imbued with certainty. "You deserve more than what people assume, and it starts now." The words hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. For the first time that day, the homeless man felt something he hadn't felt in years: validation, recognition. A belief that he wasn't invisible, that he wasn't defined by the judgments of strangers. And then Seagal did something unexpected. He tore a page from the notebook, revealing the numbers in clear, bold ink, a check far larger than anyone had anticipated. The crowd gasped audibly. Phones were raised instinctively. Some people whispered in disbelief. $50,000. One man muttered. "No way." The homeless man stared, unable to speak. His hands trembled as they hovered over the check. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, not from charity but from being seen, from having someone acknowledge his worth when no one else had. Seagal smiled gently. "This isn't about money," he said, his voice steady and calm, yet carrying the weight of authority. "It's about giving you a chance to rebuild, to step into a life that reflects who you truly are, not what the world thinks you should be." The crowd remained silent, stunned. Some were ashamed, realizing how quickly they had judged. Others were inspired, silently acknowledging the power of quiet action, of empathy without fanfare. And in that suspended moment, the world felt just a little lighter, the city a little smaller. The impossible suddenly within reach. Seagal handed the check to the man, his movements deliberate, measured, unhurried. The homeless man's hands shook as he accepted it, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to hope. Not just for the money, but for dignity, respect, and the knowledge that someone believed in him. And just like that, tension met resolution. The conflict wasn't over money, it was over belief, judgment, and humanity. And in this quiet, powerful moment, Seagal proved that calm authority and compassion could silence cynicism louder than any words ever could. The city seemed to hold its breath. The sound of traffic, the distant horns, even the shuffle of pedestrians, all of it faded into the background. On the corner of 7th Avenue, a small crowd had gathered, drawn in by curiosity and disbelief. Phones were raised, cameras aimed, yet everyone seemed unsure what to capture. Was it a miracle, a stunt, or something far more human? The homeless man stood frozen, staring down at the check in his trembling hands. $50,000. The number alone was staggering, almost incomprehensible, but it wasn't the money that shook him. It was the acknowledgement. Someone had seen him, not as a problem to ignore, not as a statistic, not as a nuisance, but as a person deserving of dignity and opportunity. He looked up at Seagal, whose calm, unassuming presence seemed to radiate reassurance. Seagal didn't say anything further. He didn't demand thanks or applause. He simply nodded, giving the man space to process the moment, space to feel the weight of what had just happened. The crowd reacted differently. A few people whispered among themselves, astonished. "Did he just?" One woman murmured. "He didn't just give him $1. He gave him his life back." Some faces betrayed guilt, their expressions shadowed with shame for having doubted or judged the man earlier. One young man muttered, I didn't think he deserved it. I was wrong." Others were inspired. A middle-aged man in a blue coat nodded slowly, quietly reflecting on his own life, and the small acts of kindness he might perform without expecting recognition. The ripple of humanity spread subtly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. The homeless man finally lifted his gaze fully to Seagal, tears streaming freely now. I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Seagal smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just promise me you'll use this wisely and that you'll never let the world tell you your worth." People began to murmur more audibly now, some stepping closer, some holding back, afraid to intrude on such a private, transformative moment. Children peered curiously from their parents' sides, sensing the gravity of what had just occurred even if they couldn't fully understand it. The homeless man clutched the check to his chest, almost as if holding on to it physically might somehow anchor the surreal reality of the moment. I can't believe this," he said, voice breaking. "No one's ever," Seagal interrupted softly. "I've seen enough people struggle silently. You don't deserve silence. You deserve a chance." And then something remarkable happened. People who had been skeptical, judgmental, or indifferent began to step forward. A few dropped small amounts of change into his cup, not because they were required to, but because witnessing one act of generosity reminded them of the small kindnesses they could offer. A woman from the crowd offered him a warm scarf she had been wearing. Another man gave him a sandwich. The ripple effect had begun, sparked by one calm, deliberate act. Even the city itself seemed to shift slightly. The wind rustled the nearby trees gently, almost like the world itself was acknowledging the moment. A street musician resumed his song, softer this time, but filled with a note of hope, and through it all, Seagal remained steady. He didn't bask in praise. He didn't demand attention. His work here was done silently. The homeless man's reaction, the crowd's awakening, the small sparks of compassion, that was enough. Finally, the man took a deep breath, standing taller than he had in years. He turned slowly, looking at the faces around him. The street that had seemed indifferent, hostile even, now seemed alive with possibility. People weren't just watching, they were learning, reflecting, questioning their own judgments. Seagal gave one last nod to the man, then turned to walk away. The crowd instinctively parted, giving him space. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. He simply walked, calm, dignified, a quiet force that had transformed a corner of the city without shouting, without spectacle. As the man watched him leave, he whispered a single word, barely audible over the soft hum of the city. "Thank you." The effect lingered. Whispers continued. Phones recorded. Hearts stirred. For some, it was disbelief. For others, inspiration. But for the homeless man, it was life, altering. A moment of true recognition, quiet yet profound, had changed everything. And in that stillness, the city learned an important lesson. Compassion doesn't need grandeur. Kindness doesn't need cameras. Sometimes the smallest, quietest actions echo the loudest, changing lives far beyond what anyone can see. The corner of 7th Avenue would never look quite the same again. The homeless man clutched the check tightly, staring at it as if it were a fragile piece of glass, easily shattered by disbelief. $50,000. The number alone felt surreal, but it wasn't just the money that left him frozen. It was the recognition, the validation, the undeniable acknowledgement that someone truly saw him. Around them, the crowd remained in stunned silence. Phones were still raised, whispers hushed, and the city seemed to pause. A few pedestrians who had previously sneered or ignored the scene now looked on with wide eyes, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. The energy in the air was electric but restrained, like the moment before a storm breaks or a secret is finally revealed. Then came the twist, one that no one could have predicted. A sleek black executive car pulled up at the corner, its polished surface reflecting the morning sunlight. The doors opened, and 3 well-dressed individuals stepped out, moving with an air of authority and urgency. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the importance of their arrival. "Mr. Seagal?" One of the executives called out, voice carrying over the murmurs. "We apologize for the delay." The homeless man's eyes darted between Seagal and the newcomers, confusion etched deeply across his face. "Delay? What delay?" Seagal's expression remained calm, unreadable. "It's all right," he said simply. "The moment has already arrived." The crowd began to murmur again, some voices filled with curiosity, others with disbelief. "Who are they?" one woman whispered. "Why are they here now?" One of the executives stepped forward, smiling politely. "We've been looking for you, Mr. Seagal." As the majority investor of the Seagal Foundation and principal donor to this city's homelessness initiative, your timing couldn't be more perfect. The words hung in the air like a sudden bright flash of lightning. The crowd's astonishment deepened. Phones were raised higher. People leaning in, jaws dropped. Some stumbled backward, unable to reconcile the quiet man they had seen giving a check with the powerful figure being revealed now. The homeless man's eyes widened, mouth slightly open. You're the one behind all this?" His voice cracked, a mix of awe, gratitude, and disbelief. Seagal nodded slightly, his calm demeanor unshaken by the sudden attention. "I am," he said. "But that isn't why I acted today. I acted because someone needed help, and because humanity sometimes requires more than judgment. It requires action." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The skepticism, the whispers of doubt, even the judgmental expressions, they all faltered under the weight of reality. Here was a man who had appeared ordinary, almost unremarkable, yet his actions carried the power of someone extraordinary. A young man in a business suit shook his head slowly. I didn't even know who he was. I judged him," he muttered to a friend, "and I was completely wrong." Seagal turned to the homeless man, his gaze steady, calm. "You have every right to feel overwhelmed. But remember this, your worth isn't defined by what people think or assume. It's defined by your courage, your persistence, and your willingness to move forward despite the odds." The executive stepped aside, allowing the man to fully comprehend the magnitude of the situation. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment that would soon spread across news feeds, social media, and countless conversations. But Seagal wasn't concerned with fame. His concern had always been the impact. The lives touched quietly but meaningfully. The homeless man's hands shook, and he finally managed to speak. I don't know how to thank you," he said, tears streaming freely now. No one has ever treated me like this before." Seagal shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise me you'll use this opportunity to rebuild your life, not for anyone else, but for yourself. And never forget that the smallest acts of courage or kindness can change the world more than you realize." The crowd's reaction shifted. What had been shock and disbelief slowly turned into reflection. Some faces softened with understanding. Some young onlookers, children peering curiously, felt inspired. People who had once judged learned in that moment that appearances could be deceiving and that true value often lay hidden beneath the surface. Even the executives seemed humbled, witnessing not just the transfer of a check but the human transformation unfolding before them. One whispered to the other, This is what our work is truly about." Seagal finally stepped back, giving the homeless man space. "Go," he said simply. "Step into your life, and remember, the world will try to define you. Don't let it." The man clutched the check once more, standing taller than he had in years. Around him, the crowd began to disperse slowly, carrying with them the lesson of what they had seen. That true power doesn't announce itself, it acts. That generosity isn't always loud, but it echoes in ways that can't be ignored. And in that quiet, profound moment, one corner of the city was forever changed. Not by spectacle, but by the recognition of human dignity, the courage to act, and the revelation that sometimes the most ordinary-looking person can wield extraordinary influence. The homeless man took a deep breath, eyes glistening, and whispered, almost to himself, "I won't forget this, ever." Seagal walked away calmly, blending once again into the flow of the city, leaving behind more than money. He left behind a lesson that respect, belief, and kindness carry far more power than judgment, doubt, or indifference. The streets slowly returned to their usual rhythm, but for the homeless man, nothing would ever feel normal again. Clutching the check tightly, he stepped away from the corner, each movement deliberate, each breath a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and cautious hope. $50,000 wasn't just a number. It was freedom, opportunity, and a lifeline he hadn't dared to imagine. But it was also a responsibility, a chance to rebuild not only his life but his sense of dignity. He walked past the crowd that had gathered earlier. Some faces softened in admiration, others carried the weight of guilt for having judged him too quickly. People whispered quietly among themselves, recounting what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" one woman said, her voice trembling. "He didn't just give him money, he gave him a chance at life." The man's first instinct was to find a safe place to sit and gather his thoughts. He ducked into a nearby coffee shop, still clutching the check, and ordered a small cup of tea with trembling hands. As he sipped, he allowed himself to reflect on the improbable chain of events that had brought him here. The kindness of a stranger, someone calm, composed, and utterly confident, had turned his despair into hope. Seagal's words echoed in his mind. "Your worth isn't defined by what people think or assume. It's defined by your courage, your persistence, and your willingness to move forward, despite the odds." Those words were more than encouragement. They were a roadmap, a guiding principle he could cling to as he took his first steps toward rebuilding his life. Outside the coffee shop, the city continued its noisy rhythm, but a subtle change had taken place. People who had walked by without notice now paused for a moment longer to acknowledge others. A passerby helped an elderly man with his groceries. A young woman handed a sandwich to another homeless person. The ripple effect of one calm, compassionate act began to spread, subtle but unmistakable. The homeless man left the coffee shop with renewed determination. He started by visiting a local social services office, using part of the check to secure temporary housing. The staff looked at him in surprise, not because of his sudden financial means, but because of the newfound confidence and pride in his posture. The man who had once shuffled through life, unnoticed and dismissed, now stood upright, exuding a quiet strength that drew respect naturally. Over the next few days, he began to set small goals for himself. He secured a temporary apartment, bought some clean clothes, and started searching for work again, armed not only with money but with a renewed sense of purpose. Every step he took was informed by the memory of Seagal's calm presence and the extraordinary act of trust and belief. He realized that this wasn't just financial aid. It was a lesson in dignity, self-worth, and human connection. Meanwhile, word of Seagal's actions began to circulate. Local news outlets picked up the story, but the emphasis was not on the money. It was on the quiet, human element of the gesture. People were inspired not by spectacle, but by empathy. Social media feeds lit up with conversations about the importance of seeing people for who they are, rather than what they appear to be. Comments poured in. "This gives me hope. We all need more Seagals in the world. Kindness can change everything." Back on the street where it all began, the corner of 7th Avenue felt different. The homeless man returned briefly, now carrying himself with confidence. He looked around, noting small changes. Someone helping a fellow pedestrian pick up dropped groceries. A stranger offering directions without judgment. A smile exchanged where there had been indifference. It was as if Seagal's quiet act had left an invisible mark on the city itself, reminding everyone that compassion was contagious. The man paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and whispered softly, "I won't waste this chance. I'll rebuild. I'll honor it." Seagal, meanwhile, had already moved on, blending into the city streets as quietly as he had appeared. He didn't linger for praise, applause, or recognition. His satisfaction came from knowing that one life had been changed, that one corner of the city had been subtly shifted, and that the lesson of empathy would ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And for the homeless man, life had indeed shifted. He had not only the financial means to survive, but also the belief in himself that he had long been denied. Every decision, every step forward was infused with the memory of Seagal's calm authority and humanity. He began volunteering part-time at a local shelter, helping others in situations like his own, ensuring that the compassion he had received would continue to spread. In that way, the story didn't end at a single moment of generosity. It continued in every action the man took thereafter. A life once defined by struggle now had purpose, direction, and dignity. And the lesson was clear for anyone who witnessed it. True power lies not in wealth or status, but in the ability to see the humanity in another person and act upon it. The city continued to hum around them, the usual rhythm of traffic, footsteps, and chatter flowing like an endless river. Yet in the minds of those who had witnessed what happened that morning, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Something had shifted, a quiet, profound reminder that even the smallest actions, carried out with intention and care, can ripple far beyond their immediate moment. The homeless man walked down the street, his check safely tucked away. But more importantly, a new sense of purpose in his chest. He had been given more than money, he had been given belief, dignity, and a chance to reclaim the life he had almost lost to despair. And as he moved forward, he realized the depth of what that meant. It wasn't simply the ability to survive, but the opportunity to live fully, with agency and pride. Steven Seagal had long walked the city streets with calm authority, often unnoticed but always observant. He didn't perform for applause, he didn't seek recognition. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had seen someone, truly seen them, and acted. The act itself had power far greater than any public acknowledgement could ever provide. The crowd that had gathered that morning began to disperse, but the impact lingered. People talked in hushed tones, not just about the money, but about the lesson they had witnessed. Judgments whispered earlier, the assumptions, the skepticism, the dismissive attitudes now felt hollow. Observers realized that humanity can be underestimated and appearances can be deceiving. True value is rarely obvious at first glance. It resides in courage, resilience, and the quiet dignity with which someone faces the world. The lesson extended beyond the homeless man. Those who had watched, even briefly, felt a subtle but undeniable shift in perspective. They considered the people they ignored daily, the street vendors, the buskers, the struggling individuals walking past them unnoticed. Each person was a life, a story, a potential moment of change waiting to happen, and it only took one person willing to act with empathy to awaken that awareness. Seagal's actions were a reminder that power doesn't announce itself with noise, spectacle, or intimidation. Power manifests quietly through calmness, integrity, and the ability to see others for who they truly are. It isn't measured by wealth alone, but by the impact one can have on someone else's life, often in ways invisible to the wider world. The homeless man, now with the means to rebuild his life, also recognized the responsibility that came with it. He understood that kindness is cyclical, that generosity given freely creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial act. Inspired, he began volunteering at shelters, offering support to others who were struggling, giving hope in the same way it had been given to him. His transformation became living proof of the quiet but profound effects of compassion. For those observing, the story was more than a lesson about giving money. It was a lesson about humanity, about seeing the person behind the circumstances, listening without judgment, and acting without ego, about the courage to defy assumptions, confront discomfort, and recognize value where others may not even look. It was a reminder that every human being deserves respect, dignity, and a chance to thrive. And so, the city continued to move, unaware that one quiet moment had changed more than just one life. It had sent a message far louder than any shout, that empathy matters, that judgment is a weakness, and that true power is calm, deliberate, and compassionate. To everyone watching, listening, or reading this story, the message is clear. Never underestimate what your actions can do. Never judge someone by their appearance, their circumstances, or their silence. True strength lies in recognizing humanity in others, and even the smallest act of kindness can create a wave of change that no one could anticipate. If you believe respect, Dignity and compassion matter more than assumptions or judgment. Type respect below, share your thoughts, share your experiences, and let your voice remind the world that humanity is stronger than indifference. Because in the end, the world doesn't need louder people. It needs kinder, quieter ones. And sometimes, the most ordinary-looking person can perform the most extraordinary acts of all.